Hello and welcome back. My name is Matty, and this is episode 7 of Vocation. Once again, I'm pleased to announce that I'm joined by the great Michael Tsarion, and we're going to be discussing one of his articles called The Angry Philosopher this week. It builds upon our previous discussion on freedom and morality, and we're going to be looking into a little bit about how the advent of psychoanalysis has changed our perception of morality in the modern world. I'll start with a little quote, Michael, if that's all right, and then I'll pass it over to you.
Sure.
So, just to start off, the id, or the unconscious as it's known, is that very proto-human psychic core that our evolution has spent millions of years molding to fit the planetary environment. Its seeming unruliness deserves a deeper understanding, if only because it grows from a long evolutionary history. In the course of that history, its dominant characteristics must have been selected for some good reason. And this is a quote from Theodore Roszak, Where the Wasteland Ends. What does he mean by that, Michael?
Well, this is dynamite, of course. And it's very, very important that we know this, because otherwise you are going to be stuck with the classic Freudian model, which, as I said, is largely an echo of Darwin, who was out at the time. And this was then hugely influential to many scholars at the time. I mean, really earth-shaking. And I make it easy. You know, we've talked about it, that the idea was that man was essentially a beast. But it didn't end there. There were obviously scholars, and they don't have to be necessarily religious at all, or Christian, like Theodore Roszak himself, great scholar, American scholar. And he's voicing this slight disagreement here. And this would then bring him more into the camp of somebody like a Carl Jung, actually. In this question that is man bestial? Now, you and I have looked at this deeply when we looked at the work of Martin Heidegger, you know, and the whole question of the origin of the will. And it seems that those guys also, and this would be then existential psychologists, existential philosophers, a great many of whom, the greatest bulk of them were actually Christians, believe it or not. This is often not well realized. And although Heidegger was not a Christian, he's giving us something that was really remarkable. And we're not going to talk about it now because we've dealt with it in the previous programs, and I hope that people will go back and watch those. But it put that little question mark. And so Roszak is picking up on that, either directly or indirectly, or probably from his own thought. And he is questioning it now. In fact, he's going even further than Heidegger did to make it explicit that, look, this thing we call the unconscious, it's not just some womb metaphor. It's not just this bestial place full of, repressed content like Freud had it. It is an incredibly deep archive that connects with nature. And so he represents this post-Freudian period scholars who started to say, maybe the whole pattern, maybe the whole concept of what causes pathology is needing to be amended here. Because the idea that man is a beast, then once you've got that model, it's just the unconscious can only be then a sort of a dark, cobweb-filled dungeon, which is ultimately some sort of grotto or mortuary where all the content of our daily lives that is getting in the way and is considered taboo by the superego, right? And by society, because when we talk about superego, it's superego / society. We dump it all there. This was the basic Freudian idea. But these ones who had read Jung and who had thought it out for themselves, the odd few, decided that this wasn't the case, and that this was a very reductionist and shallow perspective on the unconscious, which they saw as basically nature's brain, the natural within us, and is a very, very extraordinary place, probably beyond good and evil. Right? Good and evil are concepts that the superego deals with. But the superego, as part of the ego, is a very late construct. This reservoir of the unconscious precedes it. And then Rozak and others also thought this. In the aftermath of Freud, when the concept of pathology changed, that maybe it's not some bestial drives or obsessive compulsions within the psyche, within the id. It could be these restrictions and pressures from the external world that are causing neurosis in people. This was a major seismic shift that took place. And most critics of Freud, they're hopeless cases, right? Most of them, they don't know any of this, what we're talking about. So when you hear them criticize Freud, I always go ahead. Tell me an area where he was wrong. And they can't do it. The point is, what these these post-Freudians discovered, something remarkable. And that is that as far as the ego is concerned, there is a similarity between the external world, the so-called objective world, and the objective psyche, or the unconscious, the collective unconscious. So the external world of nature and the internal world of nature are in rapport. One is the analog of the other, with the little ego, you see, sitting in its fort, walled off from both of these things. Yeah. And this meant then that the natural world is the corollary, of the unconscious. Nobody had ever thought like this before. And so this is what Rozak, can you read the other 2-3 quotes we have from him? And then there's one of
Yeah,
Freud.
certainly.
Yeah.
Yep.
They harp on the same concept.
The id, or the unconscious, conserves from its long maturing process our treasury of ecological intelligence. Its intractability stems from its deeply ingrained resistance to all social forms that engender the harmony of the human and the natural. Its untamed selfishness represents a bond between psyche and cosmos, whose distinct origins reaches back to the initial conditions of the Big Bang. Just as there is a wisdom of the body, which often has a better sense of health than medical science, so too there may be a wisdom of the id that knows what sanity is better than any school of psychiatry whose standard of normality is essentially a defense of misconceived social necessity.
Now look
And
at
then,
that. Well, hold off on
yeah,
that one because I have to
we'll
make a
stick to
comment. I mean,
there.
do you see what
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
saying? That the
Mm,
unconscious,
that's huge.
far from being a bestial place, is the font of all wisdom and its intractability and its rebelliousness and its what Freud would look at as the darker elements are by no means what the paradigm originally asserted. No. So in short, what he's saying here is that when this higher intelligence that is the unconscious rubs up against the horrific restrictions and impositions of the external world, right? This is society, and this is the superego. It turns bestial in response. See, we needed to put this thing of Heidegger's down before we could get to this. Now we've got something else to unpack what we said before. There is an automatic rebelling, sort of transgressive resistance from the deep unconscious to that which tries to violate the deeper order of nature as it is expressed in the unconscious of man. So you can call that soul, you can call that spirit, like Schelling did, right? Nature is visible, nature is invisible spirit. Spirit is visible nature, right? So this part of us will not allow the narrow impositions and the silly rules of the superego and the ego. At certain points, it pushes back. From one perspective, it's like looking at a fish tank from two sides. It's the same bloody fish, but it looks different from two sides. So from one side of the fish tank, this looked like the bestial, hairy, out of control id doing its thing. But Rozak is saying, just look at it from the other side of the tank, and suddenly you've got an angelic force, so to speak, that is like a legitimate entity saying, oh, no, you don't. You don't come in here with your barbed wire fences and your cattle prods. You see? and your horrific structures and try to build try to have them surveil and curtail, just like man does in nature. Look what he does to the Amazon forest. Look what he's done to the oceans. Look what he does to the rivers. He dams them up, right? Look what he does with animals. Look what he does with fields. You see? So the unconscious, as he's saying, resists this. Not only is it oppression, it's a kind of colonization. Yeah. Like the conquistadors going into the Amazon jungle and doing their, getting up to all sorts of antics. Like King Canute standing on the water side saying, to the ocean, stop in the name of myself, in the name of my will. I will stop the oceans. I have ultimate power. Oh, no, you don't. Not in this realm, you don't. Yeah. So go ahead and read that last one, please.
Sure. The ego feeling we are aware of now is thus only a shrunken vestige of a far more extensive feeling, a feeling which embraced the universe and expressed an inseparable connection of the ego with the external world.
There you go. So Freud even agrees. Can you believe it? The man himself is actually, on a better day, agreeing with the Roseks that would come after his time. He himself is open-minded enough to think, maybe it's not. And that these bestial urges that come forth, maybe they're in response, they are there, but now we have to reframe that. There's something going on that this narrower interpretation may have missed. Now, when we go back to earlier talks that you and I have done, we talked about Bruno Bettelheim in his book, right, where he insists that Freud had this more open mind. He insists upon it. Here is an example. So people should connect what we've talked about before, that the Americans mistranslated his works to give you a very narrow, reductionist view of Freud. You see? And we've done a podcast on Enslaved called The Conspiracy Against Freud. Oh, yes, there's so much more we could get into, hours and hours of content on this kind of subject. It's even been realized by modern scholars, like really within the last few years, that one of his most ridiculed books, called Totem and Taboo, has actually turned out to be almost 100% correct. Yeah, but in the last 100 years, it was one of the most ridiculed books of Freud, Totem and Taboo, and yet it's now been discovered by new research that he was right, and all the detractors were not only wrong, Matty, they were frauds. They based their research, the anti-Freudian research that they presented to take Freud down, turned out to be completely fraudulent. Not incompetent, I didn't say that. Fraudulent. That's how academia works, yes. And Freud took the brunt of it for hundreds of years, for 100 years or more, right? Now it's turned out that modern scholarship has gone back and done a deeper research only to find out that Freud's original theories, as expressed in that book about, primitive people turned out to be absolutely true.
Yeah, they start with a conclusion, don't they? To rule them out, and then they make up whatever they'll work towards it, and
Sure.
yeah, that's how it works.
And a lot of Germanophobia is involved in there. This is the English. This is the French. These are the American, tendency was to do this. You'll find it with all the great German minds and Austrian minds and Swiss minds. You'll find this. Yes, this neglect. And I believe to the core that it was deliberate from the evidence that I've seen and from the sarky remarks of some of the great scholars, but that's off topic for now. Just this incredible idea that Heidegger was putting a sort of a question mark there in his own genteel way. Hey, maybe man is not bestial. Well, question then, what is he? It's up to you. And let's hear from the world. Rozak is going further. He's complimenting the unconscious as being a reservoir of ancestral knowledge, deep ancestral knowledge accrued over millennia. And therefore, when it is assaulted, it goes on the attack. It can turn dark. And only then certain people who wants to see it wrongly start talking about the dangers, so to speak, when in fact those dangers are articulated and contextualized by many other factors. And why we put this in is because this is indicative then of this post-Freudian zeitgeist change in which Anna Freud, his daughter, and others started to say, maybe it is the impositions of the Mitwelt, this is society, that get embodied by the superego that causes this disruption. And that the original idea, this Jekyll and Hyde idea, is not working. It was trending for a while. It answered certain things, but it's fairly, at the end of the day, a narrow view of human beings, of man, and doesn't really account for his unimaginable creativity in poetry, in art, in architecture. You're not going to be able to tell me that a Shakespeare comes out of Man the Beast. I mean, it doesn't work. It didn't work for a lot of people. And that's just one guy. Think of the whole movie. We talked even about Owen Barfield and the richness of metaphor, you and I. You see, there's something there that will not stand. Yeah. So when people criticize Freud for this and that, it's so tiring to listen to them because they don't know any of this. They don't know how the theories were expanded. Yeah. They don't know about certain names. And I really recommend that people get into Theodore Roszak's work. Excellent. And others like that, like the Viktor Frankls, you see. But yes, if you want to read the first caption of the article, we can probably chat about that too. Angry Philosopher.
Yeah, sure. Or yeah, let's go for that. Let me just share that. So this is the article here, The Angry Philosopher. I'll start by just reading the first few paragraphs. Sigmund Freud's theories about the psyche had a devastating effect on the science and philosophy of his time. Both were based on rationalism, a philosophy which championed the merits of the intellect and conscious mind. Rationalists believe that every mystery confronting humanity will one day be demystified and solved. No matter what puzzles nature throws at us, it is only a matter of time before human beings triumph and lay bare the workings of the cosmos. Get emotion, passion, and woolly thinking out of the way and forge ahead. Mystery be damned. In other words, as far as most rationalists are concerned, there are no ultimate mysteries. With patience and scientific diligence, rational man is eventually bound to unearth the ultimate truths about reality. It's the ultimate destiny of man, the rational animal.
Yeah. So this, of course, was the famous, well-known shocker. You had asked me earlier about the Cartesian Descartes, I think, therefore I am, and the splitting of the worlds. And when that hard divide occurred, then the Cartesian and the Hobbesian and the Baconian models all stepped in. They were mechanical, they were scientific. And the idea was that here's this imperious thing called mind. It's very, very special. We know it exists because Descartes' little formula there means that a self certainly exists. So we're okay with that. But what is its function? What is its job? It's just to classify. It's just to peer out from its own, cave onto the external world of objects, which of course have to be inferior because they don't have mind like we do. And they are subject to our reason. And therefore, science has its mandate now. Just classify, just compare, just generalize, and you will find great success in uncovering all the mysteries of the world. And also it's just a matter of time. And basically to this day, rationalism, scientism, they plow on with this relentlessly. But of course, but it's all false because Freud came along and said, no, the very knower that you are is a bigger mystery than anything you're going to find outside. You are not in charge of the images, the ideas, the dreams. And of course, he was the one to talk about Freudian slips. He was the one to talk about, body language, all of these things that are not under our control. And ultimately, in his descriptions of the unconscious dimension of life, it was the same thing. Yeah. And so to prove this, he dealt with the neurotic tendencies, the pathologies, the breakdown in sanity. You see that so many millions of people have. Why is that? If the reason is everything, then we shouldn't be having any of that. It shouldn't be as rampant. People shouldn't have any hang-ups if you're investing everything in that. But man is, in fact, a mystery to himself. The thinker doesn't know, as you and I have spoken about. He doesn't know. There's certain things he has no idea about. Like we said about the tabula rasa or innate ideas, right? And here we have it again. The human mind can ask the question, am I bestial in my origin or am I not? But can the mind answer it? No. So we're back. We can add another one to the heap. You and I have talked extensively about this in the last couple of programs, right? Here's another one. The mind can ask the question, am I a bestia in my origins or not? Right? The clock is ticking. And yet no answer has come forth. No definitive answer to that one is available. See, Freud just lights another cigar and says, I told you. I thought your reason is going to answer all the mysteries. You see? So in your haste, you got the Kantian paradox. You've got all the other ones we talked about. The mind cannot supply the answer. And so this was they say that, Nietzsche's God is dead caused the opening of the modern world. Other people would say, yes, that was important, but no, this is where it really, really happens. This is where postmodernism begins, because in the inability to answer these questions. And so this will now permeate through every aspect of life, not just science, but moral philosophy. What does this mean for man as a moral agent? Now, we have that other caption I sent it to you, right? As part of this article.
Yep.
Let's read that because it's jumping ahead, but it's needed. If we can go from that article onwards, it would be great.
No worries. Existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre was particularly worried about Freudianism. Certainly, he thought, it left a convenient escape hatch open for immoral types who could, with scientific sanction, deny responsibility for any and all moral infractions and crimes. A thief isn't necessarily guilty of any actual crime because he suffers from kleptomania, brought on by childhood deprivation. A sexual sadist is motivated by repressed fantasies that just came to him against his will. What's the problem? Even further, Ted Bundy was addicted to pornography, so he's not really guilty of mass murder. He tried to resist the urges rising up from the dark recesses of his subconscious, but his will was too weak. What a poor man. What's the point of punishing him? Although motivated by internal urges, he is the victim. And then finally, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered, dismembered, cooked, and ate innocent, unsuspecting humans because his basic need for company and nurturement hadn't been sufficiently satisfied by early caregivers. Wasn't he victimized long before he broke the law? And so, just to pass it back over to you, Michael, there. Are these people not just innocent victims of the unconscious ruling their lives, as Freud pointed out?
Right. Now, this is the anti-psychological school that must be brought up, I think, at some point when you're discussing Freud and all, and we haven't so far in any of our conversations, right? But it would be very amiss not to. Because while psychoanalysis was doing its thing, there were some very critical eyes watching it. And this included people like Karl Kraus, the critic, and Jean-Paul Sartre, and others, Thomas Szasz, of course, hugely. And I love their work, even though I still think psychoanalysis is a worthy thing, and we do need psychology. Nevertheless, I'm a person who often can see things from multiple perspectives here. And so their work fascinated me as well. We've talked even about Otto Rank, who was really close to Freud, but then started to, move away and started to think in terms of womb metaphors, you see, in surrogate wombs, and he became a critic. Now, he still remained a practicing psychologist, though. He still saw clients. But a great change had taken place. It was found out that many, many clients, you see, are also malingerers. So what happened was that people like Thomas Szasz and Jean-Paul Sartre and Karl Kraus, they saw that this problem of malingering was being enabled, aided and abetted by the psychotherapists.
Mm.
Yeah. And then as they dug deeper, they started to see that these malingers would just come up with all sorts of pseudo problems. And the real expert on that was the psychologist Karen Horney, whose work is one of her books is called The Neurotic Personality of Our Time. And she is a marvelous, marvelous psychologist for unpacking this thing about the malingering and how it's an epidemic of people with inauthentic problems coming. But she must have been reading her Sartre or somebody, or even for that matter, her Nietzsche, because
Mm.
this does, to give Nietzsche his due, he would have been one of these people who saw this as a problem, that man does need these pillars, he does need these new priesthoods,
Mm.
he needs this father figure, and he wants to avoid being heroic. And so this other trend then, very much Nietzsche's photograph on their wall, arose. And Jean-Paul Sartre is just one of the great spokesmen of it. So if you want to read on a little bit, more passages there, you
Yeah,
can
certainly.
not bother with quotes, but just read the passages
Yep.
that follow.
No worries. Sartre trembled at this new development, saying that because of Freud's discoveries, man now had the perfect way out. Humanity's all-important moral compass had just been uninstalled. Any sense of responsibility is rendered null and void. Man himself as a conscious moral entity need not stand trial for anything. Morality was merely a social custom or convention, not based on anything rational and fundamental. This breakdown in moral sensibility allows moderns to shift blame to a cocktail of unseen drives, urges, instincts, and compulsions. A rational man is able to blame anything and everything except himself. It's so wonderful and just what the world needs. Just to ask you again about that, Michael, last time we spoke quite a bit about morality. And then what we're getting into here is about how people aren't responsible for the decisions that they're making in their lives. And it's more about how the psyche operates that's really the driving force of everything. Could you quickly just give us a quick snippet again once more of like what morality actually is and maybe the role of responsibility in that, and then how that sort of compares to what's been going on with this advent of psychoanalysis the last 100 years?
Right. Well, see, this is one of the great discoveries of psychoanalysts, is that there's two moral centers. One is the superego, which is really the crowd in your head. It's really the public mind in your mind. And then there's this thing called the conscience, which is the moral center of this true self. And the true self is born out of what Theodore Roszak was talking about, the deep unconscious. And it has its own moral center. But this is a moral center that's covered in dust, rarely gets a voice. And the superego's voice is turned up louder, right? Is sort of like a volume setting, a gain function. And that gain is way turned up louder. I talk about sometimes about magnification, the imagos that get installed that then become the sort of hectoring voices of the parents within. And later on, it widens out to even a larger amplification of that. But the thing is magnified in the first place. So sadly, the real moral center that connects you to what I call the moral universe is always there, can never be destroyed. But its voice is more faint in terms of what to do and what not to do. Now, with the conditioning of society and the no-nonsense imperatives that are placed upon a child, he becomes a slave, you see, to these to the voice of the superego very early on. By 6 or 7 years old, with all when we talk about the Oedipal stages, that's just the training ground. This is just the training ground when a child has to leave the pleasure principle and has to develop delayed gratification and finally adhere to all the rules. But these rules are flimsy. These rules are only those of society and of a culture. And so they're relative and they are differ based on the culture. And as Freud and his people worried a lot, they can disappear at any moment. These things are insubstantial. Get one thing clear about these people. People like Freud were not big believers that civilization will last. They had read their Spenglers, they had read their Vicos, and others I could mention, and even some of the great historians like Arthur Bryant and Antonio Ludovici and Arnold Toynbee, I don't know, the whole list, right? Every one of these mighty names within history also knew this, also knew it as a given. That civilizations come and they go. Look at the Roman, look at the Greek, look at the Persian. Even in recent memory at that time, 20th century people could remember the Russian Empire, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, right? Where are they now? The British Empire took a beating, right? Where is it all gone? So this was, again, what the civilized man realized, that his civilization was a convention. But how does this answer your question when it really comes down to it? And also, people just cannot get their heads round the idea of these two moral centers and how they function. People say, if you saw open ahead, I don't find any compartments. I don't find any Freudian compartments. How do I determine where the boundaries are between an unconscious, and an ego and an ego ideal and a super ego? Come on, man. What is all of this? And I admit it's a model. But some people are still not satisfied with that, right? But the key is, think of the meaning of the word imago, and everything will be cleared up. Imago, right, is image. So when I talk about the installation of the imagos, actually what's really happening is that the person is embodying two images of their parents in their head. And those images last, and they're installed, and that's what you carry around in your head. And later on, it'll be other people, it'll be your teachers, it'll be your political leader or whoever, right, gets installed in your mind as the great iconic leader. And it's usually magnified when certain demagogues want to control your ass. They make, like the Russians did and the Chinese did, huge paintings of their leaders, right? Really, really big. Yeah, because they know exactly what the psychology behind that is. That's exactly what we do. But to understand the moral centers more clearly than even that, you must understand that it's not only the parental imagos that are embodied, it's the self image, it's the self schema. It's all to do with your imagination. So, what this means in practical terms is that there are two images of yourself that get installed in your mind. One is the image of the self that you have, that we call the self, and it's counterpointed by another image that is of the superego. Now, we're not talking about any external beings here, just you yourself have installed within you two images of self. One is the Frankensteinian pastiche, right, stitched together by the demands and the commands and the expectations of all the parental forces around you. This is why it can be justified when the post-Freudians talked about pathology being caused by external factors, not internal. We're digging deep into that now. Because those impositions from the external that start with these expectations, right, and demands, they hurt the other image. They help to suppress the other image, the more wholesome image of yourself that would be unadulterated. But it's not allowed to speak. And so the average human being is automatically and immediately in a state of turmoil within, which we've spoken about numerous times now. Yeah. Well, here it is again, but this time it matters a lot. So there's these clashing self-images. And what unfortunately the world does is it overwrites, it defaces the original image, which gets lost. But because it's of the conscience, it can't get lost completely. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be trying to resurrect itself and speak. And occasionally it does. And if you have very, very, sensitive and good parents, it can actually, in occasion, be the dominant one, luckily. And the superego thing is more like just your persona or mask that you may have to don now and again. But it's not authentic. And you know it's not authentic. It's something that you use, not it using you. See, so that would be an authentic person. But unfortunately, society doesn't care about your inner stress over this matter. And so slowly after Freud's time, clever minds started to see, wait a minute, this is an area in which we must look again at the role of the Mitwelt, the role of society in creating pathology. Yeah. It doesn't mean that in certain cases, the madness is caused by some sort of organic breakdown, where content from the unconscious has spilled over, probably rage, probably hate, right? Yes, of course, there are some people who have that problem. But it is wrong, they thought, to think as Freud did, that that is the sole origin of mental breakdown and mental pathology. Far from it. So in the years after Freud, you get the humanist psychologists, and you get these post-Freudians or neo-Freudians, whatever term you want to use. And it's their thinking that opened the postmodern world. And the left-wing group, right, their teachings are then, as we've talked about, Eli Sagan, we've talked about these people before, feminists. This is where you now look for the origin of progressivism from this left-wing trend. But its origin is from this post-Freudian model.
And just to make sure that I'm following it correctly, so what we've been discussing is people have these two moral centers, superego, the conscience. There's a conflict. This raises a tension within people. Then they start to have these issues. We say tension. Earlier you had said that the unconscious rebels against the silly rules or impositions of the ego or the superego. And then there now you just mentioned that these might come through as things like rage or of hatred. If you could speak a little bit more about how else does the unconscious rebel against these impositions of the superego? What other things would you typically see in people?
Oh, it's an endless process. In fact, anyone who's raised a child will know that there is a surfeit of tics and tantrums. You see,
Yes.
what do you think fidgeting is? What do you think breakouts on the skin are? Right? What do you think stuttering is? Bedwetting, teeth grinding, picking the nose, and suddenly a kid picking up some foul language, and it can't stop. Digging the hands into the pockets, and the million and one, or just the normal disobedience and the surliness, and a big one is the sibling rivalry, smashing up of toys. Then, as we said, once you start moving into adolescence and teenage years, you start wearing the ripped jeans, you start piercing, and you get into the tattooing, right? It's endless. It's absolutely, the whole thinking becomes sort of sadomasochistic. Sometimes a lot in people, otherwise, other times not so bad. But even somebody, suddenly loving slasher films and all the other addictions that come up endlessly. And probably even an interest in things like wrestling, boxing, martial arts, sword fencing, collecting dangerous animals like reptiles and snakes, right? It is endless. These are all what are known as compensations, you see, and this displacement theory, in which, because it is taboo for the rage to be expressed, well, it isn't. It isn't directly expressed, but the human mind then finds other ways. So bullying, yeah. When
And
you
as
pick at a
people get,
scab,
yeah.
yeah. What do you say?
I was going to say, as people get older then into sort of adult life, we maybe see this as sort of like drug addictions and things like that with it, and criminality is how maybe it starts to emerge, or people joining the crowd, and these different sort of antics is a part of that then also.
Oh, the whole of
And
criminality can
yeah,
be explained what I'm talking about. You're right. I'm glad you
yeah,
reminded me of that, because that's exactly right. The criminality in which, even when they catch you, and put you inside or try to punish you, you just carry on doing it because you don't know any other way.
Yeah.
And we also have we're living in an anti-psychological society. And so we don't have anyone who really goes to the depth with this. It's pathetic. Words are thrown around like psychopath, sociopath, deviant,
Narcissist.
multiple personality disorder, right? We're good at all the Latin phrases. But Thomas Saz makes a monkey out of all of that. The ones who really know that it's a moral question, they know all about why this nonsense goes round and round. You just got to put on a white coat and a stethoscope, sprout a lot of nonsense, right? But if you know where to go and you read the right people like Thomas Saz, like Dr. Checkley, Masks of Sanity, who's the other one? Robert Hare, who's the expert on psychopaths, Martha Stout, right? Of course, naturally, there are brilliant people out there. Goldman, and who's the other one I'm thinking of? There's
R.D.
several brilliant.
Lang.
Huh?
Big enough. R.D.
Yeah.
Lang.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
He was a real onto it. He was an eccentric, and his books are amazing as well. So you're right. There are these people who tended to see through the established lie. And even if they weren't full blown committed to this idea, they were maybe even just halfway as good enough. And they're all going to agree with what I'm saying. They're all going to agree because what we're talking about is basically 101. I'm keeping it very 101. I'm giving a sketch of what the Freud believed, and then I'm giving a sketch of, sort of some of the directions it took. And even always making sure that we bounce back to the philosophers just for a few anecdotes from them because it's very relevant. Like I said, the whole of the good part of Nietzsche is this idea that you have an authentic self, right? This is where he comes alive. For God's sake, express it. Don't let these impositions of society crush who you really are. And he went too far. He was of the belief that you should just ride roughshod over the world because this world will crush your will to power. He was obsessed by it. So he went a little bit histrionic on that point, that under no circumstances should you allow anything or anyone to help suppress. And that's what the whole history of the world is just nothing but the oppression on the self, on that image of yourself.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And again, just to make sure everybody's following again, we spoke again about this tension that arises from the conflict between these different moral centers, the superego and the conscious. And so people have these tensions, they come out, the rage and all these things, the criminalities we spoke about, and all this immoral behavior then by following the voice of the superego rather than this journey of the authentic self, this voice of the conscience. And so people have these issues and they go, well, where do I turn to? Because there is no moral center in society anymore. Religion sort of died off and passed away. And so then people then go, well, I'll turn to my doctor. I'll turn to my psychiatrist. I'll go into there to the psychoanalysis and then speak to them. What role does the doctor and the psychoanalysis play in this and how to deal with these kinds of tensions with people?
Yeah, this is the problem. If you're Thomas Saz, then it's absolutely zero. He writes from the history of it when it started, and he has no time, right? He follows Karl Kraus, who said that psychiatry is the cure for which it is the disease, right? Yeah, for which it pretends to be the cure for which it is actually the disease. Sartre would agree. Nietzsche would agree. And so, when you study this deeply like I have, then you have to have that on one side as well. You have to look at both sides here. And also, they would just point out, look, in 80 years, 100 years of psychoanalysis, the world is even worse. So it cannot stand up and give you one word about what it's meant to have done. All the problems that faced man in the 19th century are still with us, and many are even worse. That's what they would say in defense. Now, I make a plea to contest that, and I still think it's valuable, but I go into that. There's an article on my site called World in Your Head, and you only have to read the last paragraphs of that to hear my statements about why it's still valuable. And we also have a podcast on Unslaved, World in Your Head, So people want to dig into that. And generally it's like, okay, you're in a ice storm. Well, even a wet box of matches can be a lifesaver. So that's how I look at it. In the shitstorm we're in, philosophically speaking, yeah, then even I'm happy for anything that looks like it might help man discover more about himself. When it comes to answering your question, these Thomas Zazes, the R.D. Langs, certain amount of people, especially Karl Kraus and Sartre, were very, very, very pessimistic. And they were obsessed with the idea that man is always looking for some demon to blame. And now, just like he used to be able to blame demons hiding behind every rock, he blames his libido. Hey, doctor, I got these complexes and syndromes. It's my libido. I can't do anything about it. And the doctors go, that's right. You see, so it becomes a two-way street. And so not wanting to go and do anything with the conscience or the real image of the self, the false self, by being false through and through, can't take all the challenges of existence. So it breaks down like an old car, like an old junker. What do? You have got to take it in to the mechanic. And so the guy in the white coat is the mechanic for the broken down ego. That false self, that persona, right, comes under challenge from all the pressures of existence. And for a Karl Kraus or one of these people, of course you're going to break down. Happens all the time. I would expect it. So along comes an institution that says, oh, no, we'll specialize, we'll fix you, we'll readjust you to the abnormal world. Come on in. It's the insanity of normality, said the great psychologist Arno Gruen. And Karen Horney literally catalogs it. She's not the only one. She found out all the trickery that's involved in this. So there is a case to be made. It doesn't mean that some people aren't genuinely helped. But in general, there's something pestilential about this. See, Sartre talked about a thing called bad faith. It's really just the French term for inauthenticity, right? He called it bad faith. So man lives in bad faith with himself. He doesn't respect his ultimate freedom. He's always looking for something to enslave him. He's always looking for some cop-out so he won't be able to take personal responsibility. And those little anecdotes that we read about, criminals and whatever, yeah, that's very factual. Right now, our society cannot call evil evil.
Yeah.
Yeah. It cannot. It doesn't know what it's doing.
It's mental illness.
That's it. Mental breakdown, mental illness. Mental disorder, mental disease. There's no such thing. And so Thomas Zaz takes it apart.
He wrote the great book, The Myth of Mental Illness.
Yes. And 30 other books. So I've read them all.
What does he really mean by that? Why is mental illness a myth? And is it just a repackaging then of immorality? Is it just a repackaging of evil? And these are the symptoms of evil and living an immoral life?
Yes, basically. It's the inability in the 20th century. We were moving slowly toward it, he claims. With the inability, and of course he takes you step by step through this, through the story of the madhouse and the asylum, both in Europe and the world and America, to show how this slowly, all the steps that led to this. It's a long story. But you're quite right. It really led to the idea, and again, it's part of this mechanistic model that man is machine, he can be fixed. He can be
a broken cog, you can't be responsible for.
Yeah.
So you don't take responsibility.
Yeah. And once you go down that road, because this all comes out of Pavlov and behaviorism, just give man the right stimulus, and evil can be handled and controlled. It's all of this paradigm. It's still a lingering over from the behaviorist model.
This is massive. I'm having a real penny drop moment of learning that mental illness is just sort of a feature of evil, or a repackaging of evil, of immorality. Right. Immorality, maybe what I think more.
And when
instead of going to the priest, you go ahead.
Well, that's right. Instead of going to the priest, now we go to the psychologist. You see?
Yeah. It's not a demon that has you. It's that the priest, can get rid of. It's a mental illness that you're not responsible for. And here's a label for that, and it's written in this book here. This is our Bible, this DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and then here's pills for that. Instead of your Hail Marys, they go and say, here's a drug, and you can pay us for the drug. Thanks.
Yes, and here's a new vision of yourself. We'll also provide,
yes.
right? It's the same, basically amounts to the same thing. And as Nietzsche would have said, there's your authority. You abnegate self-knowledge. These guys are going to give you more models about who and what you are, for the most part. And one has to be very, very careful. It's become psychiatry, right? And Zaz was onto it, and he saw that it was slowly developing. And there's no doubt about it, he is a very harsh critic of it. And again, it's all rooted in philosophy. It's all rooted in the mystery of the mind, and also this imperious idea: who has the rational insight into the mind? Because even though Freud's own teachings put a kibosh on the age of reason, he himself was a rationalist who tried to say, well, we're going to take this irrational thing, this chaotic, demonic thing, and subject it to the light of reason. So his model, his categorizations, all of these things are an attempt to rationalize something that is inherently mysterious. So he fell into his own trap. He's trying to rationalize something, you see, that refuses to be rationalized. That's why we opened with those immense quotes. It's beyond reason. It's beyond good and evil. Yeah, this is the great paradox. And so the modern world opened, despising, like we talked about in our last program, all of these things that the mind can ask questions about but cannot give a definitive answer. See, this pulled the plug on the age of reason and allowed your Michel Foucault's and your Jacques Derrida's and all the Frankfurt School people to come in. They understood every word of what I'm talking about, and they realized this is it. This is their way to slur the reason, to make everything relative, to deconstruct all forms of meaning, and they went at it full blast. And by going at it full blast, it also meant a lot of misinterpreting some of the great minds, including Freud and Jung and a lot of other people, hinterlanding others like Viktor Frankl, Wilhelm Reich suffered the ultimate penalty, you see. So I've had to go through the rubble. And when I pick up little pieces, I'll go, oh, look at this, like an archaeologist finding a little gem. I also know, well, wait a minute. Whoa. This gem doesn't even come from these guys. This was a piece you could find in somebody like William Blake centuries ago, right? So as I'm putting things together, I'm also realizing, hey, this was in Plato. This was in such and such. Before, it's just an intriguing thing for me to notice. So I keep dipping back. The amount of stuff that's been, stolen from Hegel, Schelling, Fichte, all of these great minds, and many, many others, and then repackaged, resold at the street corner, going, hey, look at this. Somebody else has put their name on it. There's been so much of that. It's and nobody gives a damn. There's nobody else in the whole wide world doing that. All the academics are implicated. In fact, they're the ones doing it. They're the ones airbrushing other people's names off of something, that was an old forgotten thing, and slapping their own fucking names on it.
People don't realize the game. Yeah, that they're playing a game of citations. And so what happens in the academic world is whoever can get the most citations wins. Mm-hmm. That's who gets the most credibility. That's who gets the most, credibility from the crowd. The more citations I have, that means the more people reference me. And this is a huge issue in the medical industry. There's something that goes on known as ghostwriting. So it's where a lot of the big pharmaceutical companies, they'll come out with a drug or have a previous drug, and then they'll do the studies. Let's say they run 10 studies. They don't actually have to publish, say, the 9 of them that show it's bad. But if they get one that's sort of good because they've fiddled with the numbers to show what they want to show, that's the only one they have to publish. But in order to publish it, they need to get some names of people within the medical industry to sort of tag along with it. And so what they'll do is they'll ring up certain professors and things and go, look, we've done all this work. We've spent millions on these things. If you just want to put your name on it, we can then give you all the citations, and then that'll help you further your career with it. And they say, oh yeah, just put my name on it. and then that's how it's done. That's part of how the magic is played out in
Oh
there.
my
Yeah,
God. Yeah, I can well
yeah.
believe it.
I could chat to you for hours about it, but we'll leave that to maybe another discussion.
It's sickening. It
Yeah,
really is. And this is what they've
yeah,
done. Like
yeah,
I said about Freud's totem and
yeah,
taboo, they did a real number on that.
yeah, yeah.
But time told, and finally
Mm.
more conscientious people discovered the truth of it. And so you have to be on guard all the time. But shall we read on a few more passages?
Yeah, there's maybe even uh, a little quote from earlier I might share with you if that's all right, just to tee up the next
Yeah,
question,
yeah.
if that's okay. Yeah, it's a little quote from Erich Fromm, I believe it was, just to start off. Let me see if I can find it here. Yes. For Freud, self knowledge means that man becomes conscious of what is unconscious. This is a most difficult process because it encounters the energy of resistance, by which the unconscious is defended against the attempt to make it conscious. So, what is it that stops people? What makes people defend themselves from making the unconscious conscious?
Yeah, well, this is again the province of the superego.
Hmm.
That's it, straight up. The
Legitimate
superego is,
suffering,
yeah,
neurotic
it's the
suffering.
world in your head. It's the parents in your
Yeah.
head. And part of it is understandable because you can't risk being flooded by all that content we spoke about in the collective unconscious.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So a barrier was needed, but it was meant to be a flexible barrier that allowed a lot of commerce between the hemispheres. But as we've progressed in time, that barrier has become more and more rigid. And all the top psychologists know that this is a danger because the unconscious is such that the more and more you push against it, the more and more powerful it becomes. Like an elastic band, stretched to its limit, so to speak. So they Jungian school, not just them, but specifically them, because they were really up on this, because they talked about the compensatory nature of the psyche. And therefore they said that what is done on one side is compensated for on the other side. Like there's a very interesting interaction between the two. They're not disconnected. We've already pointed out that the inner unconscious is like the inner nature. Remember Schelling's great quote? And then the outer nature. So the ego is surrounded by two threatening, magnificent forces that it doesn't really understand. And so it has to defend itself, its own identity is threatened by the input of both. So when we look at all the fences and the barriers and the dikes that we see in the physical world, my God, there's a psychic analog to that on the internal. Yeah. And this is aided and abetted by the power of the superego. And this is the sensor that you and I spoke about earlier on when we talked about how dreams are garbled. Dream imagery is always brought in incoherently. And in fact, so much so that we can't even trust that a conscious memory of a dream is actually the dream we had. There's another one the mind cannot answer. So there's something really weird going on. So the simple answer is that, well, it's defense. The ego and its defenses. It's Anna Freud's first book, The Ego and its Defenses, because the ego is nothing but a set of defenses. And you wouldn't be you if you didn't have it. But in more artistic, poetic type of people, more sensitized people, that wall that separates them from the unconscious isn't as rigid. And so there's a sort of a more of a flow of fluid communication between the two. And so the ego is enriched. And it's the same with a sensitive person with the external world. They may be closer to nature. They want to live in nature. They want to be around, water, rivers, streams, mountains. And therefore they do so. And they tend to be that much more silent, quiet, easygoing, right? And loving towards animals and the natural world. Same thing. But the person can also be another person, because of their upbringing or whatever, can be deeply threatened by the content of the unconscious. And they can do so irrationally. And therefore they strengthen the walls. Their rigidity, I know people like this. They're so wooden. The schizoid would be a perfect example we talked about. The schizoid has no empathy. So when he's looking at the world, he says, but that was the source of my pain. When I had empathy, I suffered so unbearably. I was abused and hurt. I know. I'll just shut that off. I have no empathy for anyone. I'm completely cold. That's his attempt to save his identity. And he's doing the same thing to the inner self, the voice of the self. He just shuts that right out. That's a pesky, give me a pill, doctor. They don't go to therapy to awaken the inner self. They go there to get it silenced once and for all. Because that's the source. Read your Irish Froms, read your great minds. They'll tell you that voice of the authentic self is the greatest threat to human beings, and the greatest pathology comes about because it won't be silenced permanently. But our world is getting better and better and better. They've tried everything from chemical lobotomies. They can give you any kind of pill that basically lobotomizes you right now, turns you into a zombie. You see? Yeah. So these ego defenses is responsible. But as we said, when you break it down into its most fundamental, and you cut out all the models and you try to get down to the fundamental explanation, it comes down to images that you have of yourself. Now, because of these parental expectations, you have therefore a compromised image of your true self. Because how could you not? The parents have installed an image of what you must and should be. And every time that you tried to flaunt that, you got punished. And eventually, the superego by the 7 years old, now you'll be flooded with guilt. The parents don't even have to do anything. You've installed it in your head, and guilt will flood you when you don't live up to the image that's been put in your head. And therefore, the other part of you is thrown into darkness. That's the darkness of the unconscious. But Jung is the first one to point out, oh, well, actually, I think Freud did too, that anything that is repressed into the unconscious gains more power and comes back with a bang. See, this is where the formula breaks down. Yeah, all of them work this out only to find out to their horror that the unconscious is a very strange place. And it's a very, well, first of all, it's not even a place. That's just a model. We don't know what it is, right? But whatever it is, and we call it place by metaphor, anything, it's like the fifth element, right? You keep shooting at it and the thing gets more and more powerful. And so this was universally accepted. Oh yeah, this is accepted because it's been so many times shown to be this case. Call it midlife crisis, I don't know, call it whatever. Finally, a guy goes spastic. And he can't tell what the hell happened to me. Or Jung went so far as to say, you will create events that happen to you from the external world, which occur precisely to precipitate a breakdown or a catastrophe so that integration can take place. So that means that with what we opened, it's exactly the corollary. There is a deep symbiotic connection between the unconscious, the inner nature, and the external nature, and they work in cahoots over and above the intrigue of the ego. And this is what we call fate. This is what he said. When you do not make a situation conscious, it returns to you in the shape of fate, and it derails you from your ego setting. And Jung would just go, and I'm glad it does, mate, because if it didn't, you would be one of the worst institutionalized people. You'd be the organization man. You'd be almost a robot of conformity. Thank goodness there is, as Rozak said, this organic part of us that rebels against the imposition. Because if you didn't have that inner rebel, that inner wild man, that Iron John, right? That Captain Kirk that goes, question for God. If you didn't have it, you'd be a fucking, right? An absolute docile body pushed around. Most people want that anyway. They're happy because then, they take away the responsibility, which is what they all want. And big pharma and big psychiatry wants it too. But you see, up until our modern time where we're talking now, there is still hope because there is this clamor and then there is this conspiracy between the two worlds. And Jung is the man for that. He detailed this in unimaginable detail, showing you that he called it the psychoid realm, a strange place where the mental and the physical meet. And they have a very strange sit down. When they meet, their handshake is very odd, very strange. They know each other. They know each other well, even though they're very different. These are two like guardians, and they come together in the psychoid realm. And they have a common language. They have a common language that they speak. And that language is very frightening to most people. They think they've gone mad or demonically possessed or something. There's all sorts of ways that this can happen. But even the most normie person is going along, right? And if you watch the movie Fearless with Jeff Bridges, that's just one fantastic iteration of this. There are many others. I mentioned them in my book, on existentialism, all the films. And the inner world gets under heats up. It's under pressure. And something is created in the external world in the form of a person, a place, an event. Something happens, you see, that comes and jars you off the tracks of the normal ego settings. We call it, a chaos event, a dark night of the soul, or something, that will turn us on the wheel of fate. And it's all done because of this inner call. And this is why the inflexible person will always face this. The flexible person gets the messages ahead of time. He's flexible. He's listening to the unconscious. And so he won't be whacked as hard, generally speaking. Right? Because he's a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more open, and he can read the signs, and the lesson is coming, but it might be a little easier. All based on your resistance. And then to finish this part, Jung went on to give the ultimate key of decipherment when it comes to the relationship between the two. In a magnificent, one-of-a-kind statement, he solved the whole problem of the unconscious. He said that the unconscious changes its complexion based on the face that gazes into it. It'll be, if a face that looks into it, this is the ego comportment, looks into it with avarice and greed and fear, you'll meet demon. But if the face that looks into it is full of curiosity and care and concern and awe and astonishment and love, you'll see angels. So the unconscious is whatever you want it to be. Remember you talked about Heraclitus, you can't step on the same piece of water twice? That's what this is. That's what this is. So the man who fears it is already coming with an attitude of fear. He'll have a reason to fear it. The person who lets go of the fear and can let go, that's what this movie Fearless was all about, will have a different experience altogether. And he'll meet his archetypes in a different comportment. And then another journey begins. So it's not that the place is fixed. It's what's known as specular, mirror-like, mercurial. So this is all to be borne in mind. So there is no unconscious in and of itself. It changes entirely based on whose feet. You see, when Moses came into the burning bush, God said, take off your sandals. It's all based on how reverent you are when you approach the divine, when you approach spirit, or when you approach the mystery, all caps. Your own approach, your own attitude will determine how that thing responds to you. That's magic.
And I think even just to get more into Carl Jung's work, he had a line that went something along the lines of, this path to enlightenment, it's not done by imagining illuminary figures and about rainbows and all of that kind of stuff. It's done by making the darkness conscious more. And this journey of shadow work, it contains a certain level of suffering as a part of it. There is pain involved because you're going to have to understand the weaknesses of yourself and the parts that you've lost. And so very few people, when they feel these sense of shame or these deeper emotions that are difficult to deal with, they don't often come to it towards with what you said, with a feeling of love and of respect and of curiosity, they then hate those other feelings of hatred and they hate themselves for it. And then they wish to disconnect from it. Hence why they go to the psychiatrist and look for pills and all these different ways to distract themselves from it. I guess what I was just really thinking of more, how do the architects of control use this information as well also in order to manipulate us?
Well, you see, I've always said that they know everything we're talking about,
Yeah,
inside out and
that's
upside
it.
down.
Yeah.
And it's taken me a lifetime to find out what they know. That's
Yeah.
why I do blend it with conspiracy theory.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of the few
Mm-hmm.
that does, because I know inside out that they are aware of all of these factors. They know about a child's repressed rage that we just talked about. They know that it's taboo to express it. So it's bound to come out in all these compensatory ways. Therefore, they can then create the world in the media to facilitate that. They create the video games, the violent pastimes, the car chases, and all the violent slasher movies, right? Knowing that you're going to want to compensate, knowing that you'll gravitate. They create the porn, right? They create the horror. They create the gangs and the violence. They want it all. So their role in this is absolutely huge. And any fool who tries to speak about these things without speaking about how it works in terms of politics is an idiot. And Carl Jung was not an idiot. He wrote The Undiscovered Self. He wrote Man in Search of a Soul, right? All of these works that he wrote go into this. And he was on to the communists. He was on to the fascists. He was on to the left wing and the communitarians. Oh, yeah. Gustave Le Bon, right? A lot of these people knew all about how it'll work and that they've got you like a puppet on a string. Then the Marcuses came along and they helped the formula even better. They said all of this rage that's poisoning the mind, it can be ameliorated when you give a lot of sweets to people. Don't take it away, but give them sugary drinks, give them tobacco, right? Give them caffeine, ply them with love scenes and car chases and affluence. And you have your puppet on a string. You want to use the fact that there's a deep, deep discomfort, but we want to create a society then that offers you all these pastimes so that the man just sits, like a couch potato on his easy chair and he becomes this docile body, passive, just constantly on the receiving end. And given that a child hasn't even passed into the phallic stage, he's still arrested at the oral and anal, you got him. Because he'll be only too happy to be a consumer. Then you create another coterie from your same group to complain about capitalism. Capitalism has got nothing to do with what we're talking about. But that's a smokescreen so that those clever people with a higher IQ that might quiz what's going on, they'll be handed that. And boy, do they go for it. Well, it's taught from on high, isn't it? Of course you'll go for it. But under the politics is the psychology. The psychology is what I just explained. It's got nothing to do with capitalism being at fault. It's to do with the fact that you reach out for it. And why? You reach out for it because you're in a state of complete inner emotional fucking plague. And one of the ways, see, to sweeten that, to bring sweetness into your life, is to be dazed and confused on alcohol, right? And all the highs, the stimulants, and they're in abundance and they're cheap.
I look around, one of the ways that they seem to be doing it and how they're destroying the West, you see this proliferation of mental illness. And the other way that I'm looking at it now is, it's not that it's making society more mentally ill, it's making society more immoral. And we're just told it's mental illness as a different sort of veneer over the top of it, so we don't have the same type of reaction. Their best way of it is just portraying that in the media. Because people copy what they see others doing. They copy what people in positions of power are doing. And if these people in power sort of act in these immoral ways, people will be more likely to emulate it. But it's almost become cool to be mentally ill. The more you teach people about mental illness, the more they sort of identify it. And you see it with this big trans thing that's just blown up in the last decade. Like if you ask people 20, 30 years ago about how many people are trans, they'd look at you like you're insane.
Right.
But I remember it came on so quickly, and it's almost normalized in so many different ways.
Yes. This is this hatred of the self again. Remember we said
Mm,
that it's all about images of your own self?
mm,
So a point comes where the superego's image of the self becomes so unsustainable.
mm,
You see, those
yeah.
images that these people have are images that are generated by their responses to the world and to the parents. But they're also marred later by the hypocrisy that when you discover that your parents are basically flunkies, the imagos start to decay. You've installed these, but by the time you reach a certain age of teenage years, you start to regret having these parental imagos, and they start to melt and become disfigured. And you try to then replace them with others. Well, these Marcuse and Fabians know that this is going to happen. They know exactly the date. And so they make sure that you're inundated with P. Diddy and the Kardashians and some other, weirdos on TV. And they're often done as jesters, smart Alex, whatever, right? The media has a million ways of getting your identification with these pop stars. Look at this George Michael creature, right? And others. There's hundreds of them. And so the young kids start to identify with these people. And it's a slow, gradual, but it's all born out of this hatred of the self, which they know is there. But then they have to replace it with a shamira. And those shamiras are created by the media. They made to look successful. They made to look trendy. They are on every program you watch, yeah. And there's a lot of subliminal advertising goes along with it. And then while you're pushing those kinds of characters, you denounce other more wholesome types. You just don't let them get any traction. This is in music or film or whatever, right? You put these weirdos, these freaks in front of everyone, and you make them look really attractive. But it's all the same thing. So the person is numb. They're numb with the rage that they showed towards the unlovable. And you end up hating yourself for the contract. And you hate your need. See, it's not just hating the objects of your anger, you hate your own need for the love. You hate love itself. You come to hate the needs the natural organic needs for care and concern that you had. You start to hate that. And you start to become less empathic. Just like, see, when you identify with one parent, and of course I'm thinking here about the mother, and you have the incestuous symbiosis with her, then when she is falling out of love with her husband and always complaining about him and making him out to be a dork, and she can do this in many, many subtle ways without even having to verbally say it, and the little child is watching. So he says, Mommy doesn't like Daddy anymore. So I don't want to be like Daddy, but I don't have another man around to know what to be like. How can a little child of 6 years old know what not to be like? So the mother has created a vacuum in that child's mind. It sees Daddy, but it doesn't want to be like Daddy. If the mother was to love the father, then automatically the child wants to say, I like Mommy and I love her best. I want to be like the man she loves. And Daddy was attracted to her. So I want to be like him so that I'll attract a woman like my mom. This is all healthy. But if the mother is constantly blackening the image of the father, or even of all men, oh my God, the child is left in an abyss. And don't you think this is going to make his sexuality crumpled and just totally mutilated as he grows up and has no father figure or male image to even look at? You're expecting him to know what not to be like? That's how you get where you are today. That's why there's so many fatherless homes. Yeah. And on it goes. So there's just one account. So the child then because now what you've done is you've taken away one amazing imago. It's not even there. It's just a big heap of mush. So the child will double down on its projection and its symbiosis with the parent that at least it can relate with, and that's the mother. So there's a doubling there's an what I call ultra feminization now. Because in not being able to identify with the father at all, there can only be a rebound effect. And that rebound effect is the answer to your question. So many more boys are being born betas, hate the father, hate the patriarchy, and even hate God. This is the reason for atheism. Oh, yes. Our world is sinking into atheism and father hate because the mothers have insisted on creating this dynamic for their older sons, and often daughters too. But it's a very similar dynamic in a way.
It ties in with this philosophy of Gnosticism as well, also seems
Sure.
perfectly aligned with that as well. Yeah.
I would say so. I would say it warps everything. You can't imagine. So this cutting off of the penis, the transsexuality, which is being pushed and pushed at school. You see, those who've never gone to school don't know what we're talking about because it didn't happen in their day. Well, of course not. When I went to school, 95% of the teachers were men, and real tough men as well. Now, 95% of them and the administrators are women, and mostly left-wing flunkies. Right? So this is how this can happen overnight. And the mother sat at home, meant to be PTA. The women were at the lunch getting hairdos and manicures while their kids were being taught this communistic shit at school. Never once looked over the fucking fence to find out what's going on. The fathers couldn't do it. They're at work, or they don't even exist in the home. So this all happened on the mother's watch. They're 100% to blame, the feminists. And other lazy mothers who didn't know what was going on, who never introduced their children to the male world properly. In fact, may have even defamed it to such a degree that they're all responsible for what I'm talking about. Or the other syndrome is there is a man around, but he's in total fucking orbit around the female will and is a beta himself. He's what I call a chivalric male or a feminized male. He's no help. He won't help either. Even if mom likes him. But that doesn't help the child because now he's going to model himself on this beta that's hanging around or some stepfather. It's just as bad as the first scenario. So even when you do have a male that the mother likes and the mother doesn't send bad energy towards, that male figure may be absolutely inadequate. May be a fucking fruitcake. You see, and the young male kid can suddenly say, as soon as he turns teenage, he goes, I don't like that guy. Who
you
would?
think of the Homer Simpsons, you know what I mean? These are the people you can identify with as a guy, you know, growing up.
See how it works? That's
Yeah,
right. And then when you turn around to your other friends and another wider circle, all you keep meeting is the same problem. These dorky, femmy men.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody treats you, it's a war on masculinity.
Mm.
But we got to go beyond MGTOW. MGTOW doesn't know any of this.
No. Just emotional reaction, isn't it?
Yeah.
It doesn't get to the psychology.
No. They don't look into the psychology of it. They can't afford to. Because it'll lead where we're talking about. And that's a mighty study.
This is a question that'll maybe open up a real can of worms. How does the whole gay thing, homosexuality, play into what we're discussing as well also? Is it like a spectre of immorality as well also too, or how do you view that?
Is all directly based in this holding back from the phallic period. You have to be arrested. Now, this is where you need your Otto Ranks and your Julia Kristevas, who said that, you see, whereas Freud only started the whole thing off around the age of 2, you've got an eternity before that. And this includes the time of, this includes the time of the womb. Now, if the mother has been fed with too much estrogen, or she's received certain vaccinations, this won't help. But the most important thing is her autolog. Her own thinking goes into the fetus. Her distress, her fears, her money worries, her self-esteem issues, and anything to do with hatreds. It all starts then. It all starts back then. And so these key levels of development, the 3 first stages of the Oedipal, they're banjaxed. She does not want the child to pass through the phallic stage because that is the first sign of major independence. While he's still being potty trained, and when there's the oral, the child is extension of her body and her will. But the phallic stage and then the later stages of the latency and genital, they definitely represent a separation. And this threatens the terrible mother. So she wants to hold her male child. Well, she wants to hold back her both children, but as I say, there's a nuance there. But generally speaking, in terms of boys, for the most part, she wants that will and she wants that identity firmly under her control. It's called incestuous symbiosis. Partly positive because you need it for nurturement of the child, but she prolongs it. And what this means is that she prevents the child passing through that stage so that he becomes a sexual being, a proper sexual being. There's eroticism in the child's relationship to mom, but not in relationship to woman, because it's only at the phallic stage that the child starts to see another being there, not just his mom. When you get to the phallic stage, something happens and the image of the female archetypally splits into mom and this thing called a woman, this other person that wasn't there 5 seconds before. And so the child now starts to understand that there's an independent being there who's attractive to other men, particularly attractive to daddy, since he married her. And I want a woman like that in my life. I'm attracted to her. You see? And this is all by nature. This is all natural. There's nothing perverted about this. Freud framed it, as we know, the famous, I'm attracted to my mother and my dad becomes a rival. Yeah, and this was only partly true. This is not particularly, yeah, exactly, the Oedipal state. And so this was overkilled by the media who wanted to detract on Freud, right? But it was quickly amended. This is just doggerel. No. During the symbiotic period, up until the phallic period, the father is definitely an intrusion. He's definitely a threat, if you have to call it that, because object of your care, concern, and need is the mother. It's called incestuous symbiosis, and it needs to be there for your survival. And therefore, any party, no matter who they are, is always seen as an intruder into that spot. So that's what Freud was talking about. But if the mother's a good mother, a positive dragon mother, she knows what's happening. As the child gets interested in his genitalia at the phallic stage, discovers that it's not just like one of the other erogenous zones, it's special. He or she starts to ask questions about gender difference. But to answer your question, should any aberrant behavior, and it does happen with these terrible mothers, happen at this time, the kid is not able to transit through the phallic period properly, he will end up as a homosexual or a transsexual. And then on top of that will be the other things we mentioned a few minutes ago about hatred of the father. You can add a whole bunch of other things on, both for the girl and the boy. But just stripping it down without all those other accessories, just keep it that you don't pass the phallic will be enough to compromise the sexuality of the child. And the terrible mother wants to do that. She wants to prolong the incestuous symbiosis for a lifetime until she's finished with you. So she's breaking moral, the natural order. She's violating the natural law. So this is a crime, and this will have ramifications later on because the ambivalent sexuality. The child must learn to be attracted to his mother as a woman. And even if not her, then somebody else in the family that is a woman. There's this moment that happens. It may not be the mother, but it could be friends, visitors, right? They start to understand there's this thing called woman that I need to be attracted to sexually. Nothing wrong with it. From that comes an adoration of the father, in a perfect world, because he obviously got mom. So if I want to get mom or a woman like her, I think I can be like daddy. So daddy, let me study you now. Let me hang around you. He's not an intruder now. He's away shore now. And mom has introduced me to him properly by respecting the father. Is that too much to fucking ask today? But if the mother does not, and she sneers at him or backbites him or rolls her eyes when the husband's not looking, and the child sees all of this. Now, another problem that arises that will have the exact same effect is if there's constant arguing between the couples in the constellation. If there's abuse and if there's constant wrangling, and really it doesn't matter which one does more of the wrangling, as if both are in a state of competitiveness, then this child will grow up to be very left-wing and hate competition because he's seen it in the home. And don't you know, when there's competition in the home, usually in a fight, one always comes out better than the other. Right, there's a winner. And the child cannot identify with the winner because he already automatically identifies with both. We're talking here generally. There are exceptions. But generally speaking, the child's allegiance is with both parents. So when one keeps coming out on top, what do you think the child's going to do? He's going to hate that dynamic. And therefore he'll hate it in the grown-up world when he enters into the world and hates what he calls competition. He doesn't want to know anything about it from the schoolyard on. And then when a political ideology comes his way and he finds out there's this thing called communism, don't you know he's going to love it? Get his anarchy t-shirt ready to go when some fucking gormless teacher at the front of the class is starting to praise it and indoctrinate. He's already primed. So you asked, how do the architects of control mobilize this, weaponize this? Exactly this way. They pick the teachers. They pick the fucking politics. They fill the colleges and schools full of these Fabian teachers who are up to power on this. Look at the whole education movement in America, the trade unions. The education union is one of the foulest things. It's a brainchild of the most evil, demonic people. They care nothing for the children, the teachers, none of them. And this is one of the, well, remember, they're the teacher that they see you more than the parent does. So just by talking to children in the class, they know where you're leaning. They can see the feminized aspect of you and hone in. Yeah. The parent may not see it because the parent's too up close, but the teacher can see and they can pick. They know exactly what you're about. Yeah. And they can then move in on you to sculpt you even further. They see a disposition. They go, oh, good, look at that. He's real feminized, right? Let's get in there and make it even more. And then you're wondering why it all happens overnight. How this thing exploded all over the world. So it's not that hard to understand when you know the psychology. So you can meet a 45-year-old person who hasn't passed the phallic stage in their own life. Can you believe that? But that's why they're into porn. That's why they become incels or some other aberration. In fact, this is how even, much more delinquent, evil people are born. These are people who are now going to marry their AI bot. You see?
Starting. Yeah.
It's all, the whole thing is on its way. And the architects of control know all about it. They've midwifed this whole thing. And the parent hasn't a clue because the parent doesn't even know phallic stage. What's that? Semiotic stage. What's that? Half the parents haven't passed the phallic stage. You think just by breeding a child that makes you somebody special? Hell no.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something people want to do for recreation.
Mm.
Yeah.
And like, when we talk about school, another word for it is just brainwashing, And you think about what we've spoken about in the last 10, 12 hours, whatever we've discussed. Nobody learned any of this in school. This was the complete opposite of what you came across. Like,
that's right.
And it really stands out as that.
I know. Sadly, that's the case. Yes.
Yeah. Shadow work doesn't come up in school. There's no shadow work class after PE.
Oh, no. It's a big threat. I'm a threat even in this movement.
Yeah.
To the people that are meant to be a bit wiser. No, they're not.
Mm. Mm-hmm. I know what you mean. I'll maybe read a little bit at the end of this article. We'll start to wrap it up from there, if that sounds all right. So I'll start just these last few paragraphs. Sartre's form of existentialism involves confronting man with his endless act of bad faith. Only when we are able to spot our acts of self-deception and understand the reasons for them can we claim to operate as authentic beings. Is this why, in today's necrophilous culture, one is forbidden to judge, criticize, and call out evil? Is this the cause of political correctness? Has the man of bad faith assumed control of civilization? Sartre saw this type, the hater and defiler of freedom, as the truly bestial being who loathes the company of authentic men. Under his intolerant reign, the independent free thinker must not be allowed to survive. He who confronts his fellows with their acts of self-deception must be condemned and ostracized. He must be labeled an outsider and banished to the madhouse of the neither, where he can do no harm. So yeah, well, maybe final thoughts there, Michael, on what we've been discussing so far about.
So the bestial man then is now reconfigured. A new painting of the man who is the guardian of society's mores against the natural being. First, it was the inner being in his own natural organic state. Now it's the organization man. It's the institutionalized man. They're the beast. They're the guys who can sit in the classroom and control the children. They're the ones who can march in the streets and hector and pester and claim that they're offended by anybody who doesn't agree with them. This is the real beast. Erich Fromm said that the problem was that in the past men were slaves. The problem is that in the future he'll be a robot. And a robot is, of course, somebody programmed. Programmed with a program. Where does that program come from? Yeah, and he signs on for that. And the crowd is the hysterics. But the other three neurotic types might temporarily join a crowd as well. Now, look at this fiasco today called, have you ever heard of it? Gentle parenting? Yeah.
Tell me a wee bit about it. Color it in a wee bit.
Yeah, another fiasco in which the parent exercises zero discipline. So even when a man is in the house, no, doesn't work.
A feminized man. Yeah. No boundaries.
No, none at all.
No growth.
The kid, these are families who know the price of everything and the value of nothing. They communicate no value to the child. You want to eat all tubs of ice cream all day? Go right ahead. Nobody's in your way. You want to play on your cell phone all through the night and make a racket on it so that nobody can sleep? Go you ahead. You want to put crayon and paint all over the furniture and artwork? Well, we don't value it. Go ahead. We bought it, but you can just tear it up if you want. Live in litter, live in junk, smash up your toys. You'll get anything you want. You can treat anybody the way you want. You can beat up on your siblings. Nobody's going to tell you don't. This is a big movement. There's whole websites on it. There's whole groups. Gentle parenting is called. So feminized has the culture become because the child is not born for any purpose except to be a crutch, except to be a temporary toy. Then you park it with the local care home, the daycare. Somebody else is looking after it when the high is over. Or you put about 80 injections into it. So then by the time this kid, if it even manages to pass 10 years old, it'll be a miracle. I mean, without mental, trouble, without breakdown emotionally. But even if it lasts, it's going to be almost suicidal when it enters in the teenage years. Because it will have naturally embodied the imagos of these parents. Then, side by side with that, those parents have instilled within itself a kind of an image that is not going to be acceptable to the world. So your own self-image is so Frankensteinian, so false, that when it hits up against reality, by the time you've gone to school and college, it isn't working. That's how you see grown people on Walmart floor throwing a tantrum like a little child today, all over the fucking planet. Grown people throwing tantrums. If I said it 10 years ago, nobody'd believe it. But now everybody's got footage of it. Don't know what's happening. Nobody can explain any of it. They think you got some mental disease or whatever. No. These people had a self-image that wasn't going to last 5 fucking minutes when you're out in reality. It just won't last. And there's no makeover. Now you can adjust your social profile, your avatar, with all the filters. When the girl takes off all the filters and all the cosmetics and look at themselves, they immediately want to commit suicide. This is how bad things are getting. And that's all based in this imago thing, right? Because it's all images. And so at the end of the day, There is no healthy image even in the superego. Forget about the self. That's gone. But even the image that you at least put into the superego should at least sustain you. But what's happening is no, the shelf life of the imago that you put into the superego that used to once upon a time carry a person through 50, 60 years, now doesn't even get you through 15 years. You see, the plug has been pulled. So the early years of childhood are just a wilderness. And by the time that you have to enter the reality principle in adulthood, it doesn't last. So you can't get a proper relationship going with anybody because you don't know who you are. You don't know if you're coming or going. And then all that you can do is try to get the approval, you see, in this way and that. Hey, if I turn gay, maybe I'll get the, no, if I turn a lesbian, oh, no, wait a minute. If I try to be queer, if I try to be this and that and the other, let me try to be this and this and this. Society puts up these other imagos for you to try and identify with. And you'll do it in hordes because you need the approval from the many. There's no inner compass anymore. But this gentle parenting is just another indication, you see. When people like me speak, everyone's for war. That's why you have to bring up valid examples and case history to shut people up, to say, look at that. You explain that to me then. Is that good? Do you think it's good to have no discipline in the home? How would you have grown up? So then what they do, they always wheel out the same old, well, oppressive families, where the child is beaten up or abused, they're terrible, to justify the fact that they are believing in the complete opposite. And they hope that that will be enough to shut you up. Well, it doesn't shut me up. You will find out in the long run what this so-called gentle parenting will do for those children, because they will not value anything. Daddy doesn't value anything he's bought. I can spit, piss, shit on it, discolor it, throw it aside. Food that's meant to be for my health, I can tell you, no, I don't want it. Give me buckets of fucking Cheerios and chocolates and ice cream, and the bloody parents provide it. How can I value anything? And then when I come out into the world where you have to value something, I value nothing. How long are you going to last before you're on the couch? How long are you going to last before Big Pharma has your ass? When you're a raving wreck.
You'll be a child.
Yeah.
You'll be on Adderall. You'll be on the XYZ. Yeah.
And you'll be a feral child. You'll be feral.
Mm.
So you can't stand yourself.
It seems like this gentle parenting, it's like another way of absolving you of yourself responsibility. Oh, well, I give my child all the freedom to do whatever the fuck they want. And therefore, I only love them. I only love them a lot. And therefore,
right.
if they're delinquent, if they're fucked up, it's because there's something inherently wrong with them. It's because they're mentally ill, my child. I was a loving parent. I didn't do anything wrong. I never said a bad word. I never said boo to my child. It's that they're mentally ill. And that's what the doctor told me. And so that's why he's on all of these pills, and that's why he's running up the fucking wall. Yeah. And maybe even just to wrap it around so people are following everything we've been covering so far, we really broke down the structures of the psyche in previous episodes. We came across this important concept of the duality of morality. You have this superego, you have the voice of the conscience. There's the eruption of tension that occurs within people. People choose to listen to the superego to become one of the crowd in order to repress this authentic self as part of it. The inner tension and the rebellion of the unconscious as a result of that leads to these outgoings of rage and of hatred, of the drug use, of the criminality, these things we've been discussing. So people then head into the psychologist, they lie on the chair, they get their diagnosis of what's wrong with them to help ease this inner tension. Here's your drugs, here's your other stimulus in order to deal with that. But essentially what we've been talking about today, a lot of this mental illness, as some of the greats like Thomas Szasz spoke about, these are a myth, or these are metaphor in a certain way. And they're a chimera then, or maybe a veneer, or a synonym for evil, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, so it's mental illness is really just another way of repackaging of what evil used to be in our society. Have you any final thoughts on that, Michael? Is there anything I'm missing there that people should focus on as well also?
Well, I think that for me, the most important discovery is this recontextualizing of man as a beast. By flipping it 180 degrees, that instead of talking about that, He is bestial in his origins, a la Darwin and that school. To realize that the bestial is actually a response to evil forms of oppression on the authentic self. Then that recontextualizes the beast. See, the beast is rattling the cage because he's trapped. He's not evil at all. He is just the one who says, I'm not going to stand for this. Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Right? Then, on top of that, there's another beast, the social beast. The man who polices everybody else to be like these parental imagos who literally forbid you, you see, to ever go near and be authentic in terms of self-expression, in terms of speaking from the self. And so they build the institutions, they build the cages, they make the reports, and they gatekeep. They make you jump through the hoops. And that's why the schizoid has no problem today working in the world. They make great doctors, great nurses. You see?
I'll join the police and arrest people for Twitter posts.
Sure, that's right. They make great bureaucrats. You do very, very well. Obsessive compulsives also. So many of the so-called neurotic types actually find to their amazement that with a little bit of adjustment, they can adjust right to the normal world. Not too difficult. The depressive can go in, give a few accounts of his state of mind. They go, you're on welfare for life. Just go and sit in mom's basement and brood. We're giving you the medication. Just make sure it's regular. The hysteric, well, we know all about that. And the depressive and the hysteric, maybe all of them, they go for the Marcusan idea. Since I'm in pain and inner turmoil, give me more and more sweets. And see if you don't. Or see if I start sucking on this sweet and it's the same one that you gave me before. I asked for spearmint, you give me peppermint. Oh my God, I'll be out there with my placard. I'm going to be beating on the doors of God, pretending I'm a discontent. Only because you haven't plied me with more sensational satiation and titillation. That was the contract, wasn't it? I do not want to face myself. I don't want to face the screaming emptiness inside. And you're meant to keep me distracted. And you're not doing it. Yeah. So that's the world today. And the mandate of any big government or anything like that is entirely to do this. Not to deprive, but to inundate with stimuli. And so as far as they're concerned, the internet and the cell phone, and the AI is coming, is a wet dream. They've had it for years. But they're wheeling it out now. They know the time is right.
Yeah. We'll maybe wrap it up there then for another week. There's another couple of hours done. So, just once again, thank you very much, Michael. I really appreciate your time and for your insights. And I know you spent your whole life dedicated towards studying this topic, and I really appreciate you coming on here to share it again. So yeah, I will see everybody next time. Thank you once again.
You're welcome, mate. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.